When a giant in supply chain management falters, there are lessons businesses both small and large can learn. Back in 2005, Dell Computer could do no wrong on Wall Street or Main Street. It was delivering customized PCs to consumers at increasingly low prices, and its internet-driven supply chain system was the envy of the world. However, at that time, Kellogg professor Sunil Chopra saw that Dell was sinking into real trouble. In a 2006 article, Chopra pointed out that Dell would have to radically change its distribution model in an increasingly mature PC business. By 2008, Dell was making many of those changes, including a first-time entry into retailers like Walmart and Best Buy. And now, writer Lisa Holden speaks to Sunil Chopra about Dell's story and how other businesses may profit from it.
Welcome, Professor. Right about the midpoint of this decade, you started looking at the once unstoppable business model of Dell Computer and found that there were some cracks starting to form in the foundation that a lot of Dell watchers really hadn't focused on. And you foresaw that they were going to have to change their direct customer sales model, and after you published your research, lo and behold, they did. So it must be very nice to move a Fortune 100 company into action. But tell us what really happened there.
For a while, I'd been studying the question of whether distribution that is more centralized, like Dell had, or more decentralized, like supermarkets always do, is more effective. So which mode of distribution was more effective and under what conditions? This became especially interesting in the context of the rise of the internet around the mid-90s, when centralized models, which historically only existed through catalog houses, now suddenly exploded. If you look at the difference between centralized and decentralized models, you can build a framework based on what customers want and the costs of providing what the customers want. Now, from a customer perspective, some of the things that really matter are response time. How quickly can you get your product? Clearly, at a supermarket, I can get my product within 10 minutes. If I order online from a centralized facility, it's going to take days. Second thing that matters is variety. How much variety can you provide? And everybody remembers how Amazon first advertised, get any of 4 million titles. It was variety that they were pushing. From a cost perspective, costs that come into play are you have to hold products. So there's a cost associated with holding the inventory, which, especially in the high-tech business, can tend to lose value very quickly. Second is the cost of actually moving the product or transporting the product. And third is the cost of setting up the infrastructure, the facilities to handle all of this. Now, if you look at these factors, then certain product and market characteristics end up supporting centralized structures. And these market characteristics tend to be products that are changing rapidly, products that have a lot of variety, products in the early phase of their life cycle, products that are high value relative to weight, so that transportation cost is small, but the cost of holding inventory is high. If you look at what are some products that fit into this category, when PCs were customized historically, they fit almost perfectly into this category. Their value was high, they were changing all the time, and because of customization, variety was massive. In fact, Dell allowed people to customize along multiple dimensions, using which you could create hundreds of thousands of finished products.
And that built the company.
That's basically what built the company. In fact, in terms of timing, the growth of the internet could not have come at a better time for Dell. Dell was pushing customization, which was very easy to sell online. Just using drop boxes, a customer could configure their machine. Imagine doing that on the phone. It's a whole lot harder. Not only that, it allowed them to then link the ordering to their factory, which would build the machine on demand. So the fit was perfect. Now, if you look at what's happened over the 10 years or 12 years since the mid-90s, I think a couple of things stand out. One is the power of computing has increased exponentially to a point where I would say standard models handle pretty much everything that people need to do. Simultaneously, the value of the hardware itself has dropped. A laptop today at the cutting edge can be obtained for less than half the price of a laptop 10 years ago. And of course, there's no comparison in terms of performance. Especially for business users, the basic model does everything they need done. So you have a transition from a very highly customized, high variety, high value setting to a much more standardized, and with regards to the hardware, a lower value setting. I think this is really what caught, I don't know whether it caught Dell off guard, but it certainly affected the factors that were their core strength. What was their core strength in the new environment actually becomes a bit of a weakness.
And this is a case, too, where the software industry, software producers are becoming much more powerful in determining what computers will do. So that's the other side of the coin.
Absolutely. Today what is happening is, for most of us, it is the change in software that might drive any hardware change that I require. Not only that, what is different between my PC and yours, especially in laptops, my laptop and yours, is the software we have on it. So every company has a different image. So the hardware, as a result, is becoming more and more standardized, and most of the customization is really on the software side. Apple, in contrast, I think took a lead on this. If you look at their products had absolutely no customization. We all get the same iPod. They have one or two variants of their laptop, one or two variants of their desktop. And they very quickly realized that the decentralized retail store model was a very effective model to get that product to the consumer. Once this happened, Dell's centralized model lost some major advantages. So its one major advantage was lower levels of inventory. Now, lower levels of inventory are much more effective when the value of inventory is high, which means the cost of the hardware is high, and it is differentiated. However, when you are all buying and selling the same laptop, it just flies off the shelf.
And they made themselves into a commodity, really.
Absolutely. So once it turns into a commodity, inventory benefits shrink. Meanwhile, transportation costs become a big factor. For a $2,500 machine, a $100 transportation cost is not a big deal, but for a $500 machine, it is. So it is at this stage, I feel, that Dell lost its advantage. However, I think one of their problems was that when you've succeeded, it's by doing something, if there is a way of functioning that has been at the core of your success, that is the hardest to give up. And if you were to identify what was the core of Dell's success, two factors would come in. Their centralized model that was built to order. And that was a very difficult thing for them to give up, and it was only in 2007 they finally announced a tie-up with Walmart. In contrast, Apple, which was selling very standardized product, I think their strength has been to essentially sell us all a commodity while making us feel cool. But each of us carries the same iPod, and they're selling iPods in very large volumes. They opened their stores initially with a marketing goal in mind, but very quickly realized that was one of the best ways to sell the product. A lot of their growth and profits have come from their retail stores.
Well, it's interesting, too, because you could argue that Dell had its own version of brand awareness, but Apple's version of brand awareness is quite, on a different level, and that's probably saved them. Well, not just saved them, but obviously transported them to where they are in the industry today.
Absolutely, and here, if you look at their retail stores have been incredibly helpful from a brand awareness perspective, but also from a supply chain and distribution perspective. Their stores, by being close to the customers, make the customers more aware of Apple products. But they're also the cheapest way of getting the product to the customer.
Right.
The customer can come in, walk out with a machine almost immediately. A great contrast to draw is Gateway.
Right.
Gateway in 1996 opened Gateway Country Stores. Just as a point of reference, today Gateway is owned by Acer, and Gateway does not sell any of its own machines. All its machines are sold through retail.
Yeah.
But when they opened their Gateway Country Stores, I think they had a tremendous opportunity that they lost, because the way they used their stores was primarily to sell. Customers could walk in, order at a store, but not leave the store with a machine. The machine was shipped to them centrally.
Now, Dell has adopted this model. Where do you think this leaves them? Is it too late, or can they recover?
I think, it is a little bit late, but Dell is a very strong company, so I would never rule out the fact that they can do well. However, I think they have a couple of other factors that are going against them at this stage. One of those is, if you look at assembling PCs, this is something that they historically did on their own. It was different from what some of their competitors like HP did. They had outsourced assembly of those machines. Now, this made a lot of sense when you were customizing PCs. But today, with standardized laptops, high-cost assembly in Austin is harder to justify than it was 5 years ago. So I think Dell's challenge is, not only do they have to change their retail model, they also have to end up changing their sourcing model.
The cost of customization is not just coming down in the technology industry, is it? What other areas would you compare to the Dell model? What else is, who's succeeding and who's not doing so well?
I think if you look at the Dell model as a centralized model, I think you can look at examples which go either way. I think one of my favorite examples is a diamond retailer called Blue Nile. Blue Nile came into existence about 8 or 9 years ago, so in the late 90s, just before the internet bust. But it is one of the companies that has survived the internet bust, to the point where in 2007 they sold more diamonds in dollar value than Tiffany's. And let's see why this contrasts with where Dell is today. Whereas Dell's products have become more standardized and commoditized, as you said, diamonds by definition are unique, especially when you go into slightly higher end diamonds. The moment you are buying diamonds that cost thousands of dollars, you're buying based on the 4 C's: cut, color, clarity, and carat, which makes each diamond unique. So now picture a chain of retail stores that gets one of these diamonds. It has to make a decision which store to carry that diamond in, which means the other stores do not have that diamond. Now, Blue Nile, in contrast, just carries that diamond centrally, and any customer can access that diamond. So this is an example. So again, going back to the variety value idea that I had introduced at the beginning, this is an example where Blue Nile is selling a large variety of diamonds, which is a very high value product whose relative cost of transportation is low. If they were to try to sell it through retail, they would require a lot of inventory, which would just sit on the shelf till the right customer walked in. By having it centralized, Blue Nile is able to provide a customer with exactly the diamond they want, while carrying a lot less product. The net outcome is Blue Nile is able to price its diamonds 20 to 30% lower than the competition.
I wonder in 5 years where you see that company. I mean, is it possible in the technology industry to look that far ahead and figure out how they're going to be adjusting their supply chain to get to the customer of maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now?
I think Dell has a real question on their hands in terms of what their focus will be. They have traditionally succeeded with hardware. They have succeeded with hardware that was sold both to business and individual consumers, customized and built to order. Now, in the future, I think this particular segment is going to face some challenges. And Dell's question will be whether they want to go in for more services, or if ideas like cloud computing take off, where people are building large farms of computers, whether Dell will try to supply them, whether Dell will try to move into higher-end computers, maybe supercomputers. Anytime they move into higher-end categories of hardware, their current model stays suitable. Anytime they're forced to compete in more commoditized, lower-end parts of hardware, their current model becomes a weakness.
Right.
So this will be a big challenge for them going forward.
Is a bricks and mortar model going to really sustain them for that long, or are they going to have to come up with a better solution?
Here I think for the current hardware, the bricks and mortar model is going to become the more dominant model. Will it sustain their growth? Clearly no, especially in the United States. Now, globally, that is a model that could work. In fact, they have partnered up with chains in China, they have partnered up with chains in India as well. But locally, that is going to be an issue. Over time, especially globally, they are also facing other models. For example, in India, for the longest time, the dominant model was where local stores would assemble your computer on demand from a kit. Now, the advantage here, of course, is technical cost is low, so you can find an assembler for low cost in India. So carrying the kit and assembling it on demand locally works very well.
So, Professor, what does that mean for the future of customization?
So I think there are going to be a few possible outcomes. At one extreme is the way we purchase paint today at Home Depot. Today, we walk in with the color we want, they match our color, and they mix the paint on demand. Basically, what has been created is production capacity that customizes very close to the customer. Now, in other instances, what is likely to happen is I, the customer, might get to choose which aspects of a product or service I will use. So I might actually get an appliance which has electronics with multiple capabilities. Depending upon what I have paid for, I get to use those capabilities. So I can visualize potentially customization coming all the way to my house, where I decide how I'm going to customize. Now, other possibilities, if you think in terms of variety rather than customization, a good example to think about is books. If you look at the 4 million plus titles that are sold, maybe 100 of them fly off the shelf. For the remaining titles amongst the 4 million, a centralized Amazon type model is very powerful. In fact, with print-on-demand technology with which Amazon has purchased, it makes them even more effective because they don't actually have to carry the entire 4 million titles in inventory. They can print them on demand. In contrast, the remaining 100 titles which are flying off the shelf could be sold anywhere. We don't necessarily need to go to a Borders to buy the best-selling title. There is no reason I couldn't buy it at my supermarket. There is no reason I couldn't buy it at my Starbucks. A very decentralized model. So I think the fundamental question will be, are there dominant product types that customers want? These will tend to be selling in large volumes. These are best decentralized. Bring them close to the customer.
The supply chain issues seem to be so much more tied into what the customer is saying and doing at a momentary level.
It is, and I think Dell, this is my personal opinion, that I think Dell was actually listening to their customer. If you look at the period from 2003 to 2005, Dell probably did more than anyone else to drive down the price of hardware, to bring the $400 machine to their customer. Unfortunately, what they did not do is change their supply chain along with that. So they listened to their customer, that changed the characteristics of the product that they were selling, that changed the characteristics of customer demand, but they did not adjust their supply chain. I think that is where they were still stuck to a model that had been incredibly successful for them, but at a time when the customer was asking for something different. Today, the customer was asking for a cheap machine quickly because the basic machine did everything that they want. Now, their supply chain was structured to supply a highly customized, expensive machine within a week at a lower cost than anybody else. But it was not well equipped to supply you a cheap machine quickly. Others did that much more effectively.
Mm-hmm. All the more reason for supply chain visionaries who have something to do with the brand, I guess.
Well, I think, in my opinion, the most successful supply chains are those which really align the structure of the supply chain with what the customer wants. We looked at Apple. We looked at the way Dell was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Anytime you can achieve that alignment, in my opinion, the way Blue Nile has achieved with regards to diamonds, anytime you can achieve that alignment, you're providing the customer what they want, often at the lowest possible cost to yourself. That's the situation where you're creating an incredible amount of value. Success will surely follow.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.